Hi, I'm Shaka Hislop, and you're here at Extra Time TV.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Extra Time TV. This is Andre Soklal, and we have a lot to talk about. Joining us today, before we move forward, I'm not alone. We have the one, the only Kelvin Jack. He played for us. Most of you know him from the 2006 squad, but played with Reading and, had a very decent career. And the reason why we have you on is not because we're good buddies, but you also have, inside knowledge of the successful times at Trinidad Tobago. You've been in and around the Football Association for a long time. You have a lot of footballing experience. Kelvin, how are you?
I'm all right. Thanks for having me on, Andre.
Yes, folks, Kelvin has always been a valuable contributor to Extra Time TV since the very early days. So, it's always a pleasure to have you on. But, we have a lot to talk about. Dwight Yorke recently released some statements, a very comprehensive article from Wide 868. Maybe one of these days we'll bring him on, Kelvin, and, we'll have that chat ourselves. And, I can't summarize the entire article because it's very long, but just to kick things off, the key headline that caught everybody's eye, Dwight was saying, you don't have to be a football expert to see the improvements. Of course, that's in context with him evaluating his performance. And, he had some strong opinions about his tenure, about how the TTFA handled things, particularly the president and so on. So just give me your initial reactions before we go into the greater details. Let me hear your thoughts.
Well, I felt it was a very good interview from Dwight. I think he gave us quite a good insight. I happen to agree with many of the things he has said. Of course, I'm sure that the president, Kieran, he would also have his side of the story. So, we can't discount that. But I just felt that the interview in general was quite comprehensive. And, it was interesting to hear Dwight's take on things.
And, one thing is, just for insight, so we have a lot of younger viewers now, you already know, if you don't know, Kelvin Jack has a lot of experience with not just as a player, but, you were on the coaching staff at one point in time, myself included, with the women's team. And it's very different from, as a fan. Neither way is bad. It's just different. Seeing it from a fan, seeing it from a player, seeing it from a coach. How many different dynamics goes on behind the scenes before international window. A lot of people believe, and Dwight mentioned this in his interview multiple times because he clearly identified this, that sometimes there is clearly a misconception that, you just pick the squad, you work with the players day to day, and there's a lot of logistics that the coach and everybody else behind the scenes has to put into it behind the scenes. And this is not just, us highlighting Dwight Yorke, but just a wider knowledge base for everybody who has been watching EXTV for years. We have a lot of new young viewers. Our subscribers went up to, 3,000 in the last couple of weeks, Jack. So that's very good. But going back to the topic, there's a lot of quotes, and I'll quote a couple in there. And of course, if you see any that you remember, the first thing he highlighted, and he broke down in great detail, is about, changing the mentality of Trinidad Tobago football. In the manner in which the relationship ended, he felt as if he had a lot more to give. He specifically mentioned in the article about a little bit of, and like I said, we're going to look at both sides of this, but he spoke about, things that were, not fulfilled, and in particularly what he did. So we'll start with the positive things he mentioned about changing the mentality. He said when he was playing football many years ago, he said nothing changed in Hasey Crawford since he was there playing when he was 14 years old. The construction, the layout of the stadium is the same. And he decided to add certain things to the changing room. And, he put the quotes, which a lot of championship teams do, and changed up the aura of the changing room before games. Players physically couldn't fit in there. You have a staff of including players, about 50 people in there, and they were cluttered up. People didn't have seats. That amongst other things he mentioned that he did, in addition to changing the mentality as well as the players. He mentioned as well, the gap. A lot of people, rightfully express their opinions. They want certain players. We should pick local players. And he also highlighted, and we spoke about this in previous episodes, the physicality of the players at international level. When they come to the training camp, they do what they're supposed to do, but then they go back to their clubs, don't do what they're supposed to do. And, he made an extra effort to really get them up to that physical level. And the tone I got from, which is many things, is that, that was not a lot of people don't know this. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think Dwight is correct in what he said in terms of changing the culture of the players and the culture of the football fraternity as a whole. I have always found it to be quite unprofessional for the only period I believe in our history, maybe 1989. The guys from back then could probably could probably give a bit more insight with that, and maybe the guys from 1974 qualifying as well. But I would say, maybe for an 18-month period, 2-year period, we had a bit of professionalism in Trinidad and Tobago football, and they could see that the success, we had out of that. But my experience when I was there, when I was part of the staff, I felt that the players needed a shift in mentality. That's not saying that some players were not professional, because there were some players who impressed me with their attitude. But in general, I believe that Dwight is correct. I believe there needs to be a shift in the mentality. The whole professionalism, it's not at the level required to be able to be successful at international level.
Yes, and just to pull a quote from the article here, because it's way too long, but I tried to pull the relevant ones as possible. It started off with him saying, this is due to, everybody was speaking about when, let's be honest, a lot of people, the majority of fans were happy with Dwight Yorke's appointment. He has that star boy, the former Manchester United player. He won the treble. It is what it is. And, generally, even though we didn't qualify and people were disappointed, there was a generally positive feedback from everybody. Generally, Trinidad and Tobago was very divided. But in this particular case, he brought that unity, and he mentioned this. He said it was a bit of a slap in the face knowing that the work we put in to take that team to where we did, what we had to go through to get the players to join, the change in the dressing room and the culture of football. Anyone who saw Trinidad and Tobago play over the year, we took the reign. You don't have to be a football expert to see the improvement. You are seeing a team that can compete and not get played off the pitch. Kieran Edwards was next to us on all those journeys, having conversations on the side of the pitch, saying this team is moving forward, and then to come and undermine the work we have done. He is being disingenuous. So, powerful statements, from Dwight Yorke. Let me hear your thoughts.
Yes, and again, I believe he's correct, and of course, I'm not going to discount Kieran and all of this, because I'll be curious to hear what he has to say. Is he going to counter what Dwight is saying? Someone would be telling the truth, but in terms of in terms of the football inside of Dwight is correct. I actually felt sorry for Dwight and his staff, because I felt we are lacking in quality. We don't have the talent that we had from years gone by. And I felt sorry for him, because obviously he has a certain way he wants to play. He's trying to set the team up in a certain way, and he's not able to accomplish those goals because he doesn't have the quality to be able to do it. And that is very difficult for any manager. Any manager, that is difficult. So I felt that there was no reason for a change with Dwight and his staff. I actually messaged Dwight right after the last qualifier. I sent him a message, because I know the man. I know he has very high standards. He is very professional, and he has his goals that he wanted to achieve. And I sent him a message and told him, listen, Dwight, do not resign. You have, certainly my support, and you have support, I believe, from, proper footballing people, proper footballing minds. I've heard a lot of people, a lot of, pundits talk about, this one could have done better and that one. We are deluded in Trinidad. Andre, we are deluded. We think we are better than we are, right? And I'm just being straight. We have a league that's fledgling. We have a league that is not a professional league, right? But for some reason, we believe that we should be beating the US, that we should be beating Mexico and Costa Rica and Canada and these countries. We are honestly deluded. We are not realistic in our goals. He is correct. Jamaica and Curacao, they are ranked higher than us. Even though their structures as well are far behind world standards, their structure is still better than ours. So how do we expect to be able to beat these teams? we are honestly deluded and we're not being honest with ourselves. So, Dwight and his staff was operating at a disadvantage, in my opinion, and also a lack of talent. We only have a few players, in my opinion, who up the international level. I looked at a game the other day where we played because the team was in Uzbekistan, and their players they're not lean enough. They are not lean enough. They're carrying too much weight. They're carrying way too much weight, and I could see that. So, you could imagine what Dwight and his staff, would be seeing because they're seeing them close up. Some of those boys they're carrying too much weight. You can't possibly be fit enough, looking like that to play international football. It's just not possible.
Yes, and he emphasized even before this article with why they 6'8", and for those who follow football deeply like yourself, myself, and others, we know what is required, especially you. And this is why it's very good to have your insights. Because, as we say in Trinidad Tobago, there's the rum shop talk. And then there's, structured, informed opinions. And you played at that level, just like Kelvin when he comes on sometimes, Shaka as well. And one of the things, there's many problems, but the one thing that everybody agrees on is that, the physical aspect of our game is not even close to what it should be. And, if you look at it, and I agree with him as well, because I said it on a previous video as well when we found out he was, dismissed or resigned, depending on how which view you want to look at it as. The physical attributes is something Dwight Yorke, he did it as a player. Even if you read all his biographies, well, not his biographies, but look what Sir Alex Ferguson had to say about him. They may say a lot of things, but physical discipline was not his, and nothing. You can't criticize the guy. Even if you look at him now, he's a living example. At his age, he looks very fit. He commands that kind of presence. He shows his attitude transmitted to the team. You saw Trinidad Tobago, as he said in his words, and I agree, that was very proactive rather than reactive. And I understood the obstacles he had to face coming in, and I was worried for him when he came in. I was concerned that, he's just going to come in like all the other coaches before, not going to get his results. And people are just going to blame the coach, cast him aside like we usually do. And then we have a rinse and repeat conversation about what needs to change. And yet it doesn't change. And to me, I think it's very important with somebody of his stature to speak out about these things, because I always tell people, sometimes silence is one of our biggest enemies, because there's a lot of people who can't speak out and they don't. And of course, everybody tries to be professional. You don't want to just mindlessly say things. But, seeing what he did, seeing the progression of the team, like I saw improvements in the overall fitness of the team, where usually, and Shaka and I spoke about this, you as well, where around the 60-something minutes, we would always have this massive gap because they couldn't sustain the intensity required for the entire game. This. Once your fitness levels are not up to par, the decision-making goes down. That ability to just see out a game or just get things done goes out the window if you're not physically in the right place and mentally. And I believe in a short period of time, I would say this, that maybe if Dwight Yorke had maybe about 1 extra year, if he could have done so much in less than a year, imagine what he could have done in 2 years. And I think his frustration, which was shown in this article, not just from a sporting aspect, but how things were handled behind the scenes. He mentioned, certain promises were made, certain things he asked for from the president, was not fulfilled, even though the handling of certain things. He used the word, let me pull it up really quickly, because I want to use exact quotes. No hearsay on the EXTV, folks. Where did it go? Where is it? Oh, yeah. So he's being disingenuous. So, we spoke about the technical side of things and the fitness aspect of things, but from the Football Association side of things, what do you make of those comments?
Dwight will have his reasons for saying so, and I don't think there's any reason to doubt. Although we haven't heard from the president yet, but I don't think there's any reason we could actually doubt, because this is historical we're talking about. So he's talking about players still awaiting payments, and this is an issue that has been going on for a number of years, and I cannot believe it's still going on. That these boys are out playing, and a lot of these players they absolutely need that match fee, and they are holding on for it, and it's not being paid and what have you. That is highly unprofessional and dishonest as well. They have to be paid, so you should be paying players their match fee. And if Dwight is highlighting that, he's highlighting it for a reason, because they were not paid. So, Andre, I keep saying it, and all the coaches before, because Angus was in charge before. I can remember I've spoken to Angus a couple of times as well. I feel sorry for these guys because they don't have the quality required. And when I say the quality in the players required. And it needs, I keep saying it, there needs to be a huge change, a huge investment in the infrastructure of Trinidad and Tobago football. Every cycle comes around, and for some reason, we expect a miracle. We expect a miracle. And Dwight highlighted it in the article. He said, he spoke about 2006 and what happened. We had experienced players. I think we had something like 15 boys playing in the UK or overseas somewhere, right? So, we had a very experienced team. And then we had a good manager who came in, who was able to organize us. And we still finished fourth. We still went through a playoff. And we had, a very, very good team in terms of the history of Trinidad and Tobago football. So, I believe the public have to be realistic. The pundits have to be realistic. Those who making comments in the media and what have you. I am telling you now, they don't know football. If they are honestly saying that that we should be qualifying for the World Cup, when you see the quality we had competing against the other teams, honestly, they deluded as well. They would be deluded as well. We did not have the quality required, Andre, to qualify. And, Dwight, Angus before him, what are they supposed to do? Abracadabra. Is it just abracadabra? Right? We really expect to beat the US, Mexico, Costa Rica, and these teams. And where people get fooled, Andre, I'll tell you where people are fooled, right? We may play one of these teams and we may lose 1-0, or we may lose 2-1, or we may lose, I don't know, 2-0. And the score line looks close. So you have everyone, all the fans saying, oh, we are not that far away, oh, it's close. No, it's not close. It's a million miles apart. Anyone who knows football and they look at the game, you could see the gap in quality, the gap in the tactical setup with the team, the gap with the tactical knowledge of the players, the gap with the technical ability of the players from both sides. So we have to, the only chance we have, as far as I see it, is there must be a comprehensive review, a comprehensive change of the structure of Trinidad and Tobago football to give our national coaches the chance of being successful on the international team, or we'll be like this every single time. Listen, it's so bad now that there's so many teams qualifying for the World Cup now. I don't agree with it personally, around the world. I think it's becoming a bit of it's just too many teams, right? But I honestly wish the structure was like this. Now I've played in probably 2 or 3 World Cups. But the fact remains is we need to organize our football. The infrastructure, the organization is in shambles, and that falls on the head of the president and all those stakeholders of our football. And until that changes, and until there is comprehensive change, we have no chance. We have no chance. We'll be back here, Andre, talking about the next World Cup and what we need to do.
Yes, you said it exactly how I would say it. In fact, I was actually going to phrase it exactly how you were saying it just now, because this will be literally a copy and paste of the discussion we'll have at the next cycle. And I had some discussions off air with some people, because, we have a lot of viewers now in the live stream and so on. They give us a lot of feedback. It's fully interactive now, like, unlike in the past, it was on the television and you couldn't have that interaction like what we have now. And, viewers are now they're having more access to information. They're allowed to do their own research. They're no longer at the mercy of what the media or even the federations, associations are giving out. They can now do their research and draw their own conclusions. And while still they still are quite unrealistic about the expectations, they're now starting to ask questions. And, it just builds on what you're saying, and, with the articles like this coming from Dwight Yorke, I spoke to a lot of younger. Every generation is a new set of young fans who are very enthusiastic, and then they get quickly jaded because they come in really excited and they want to support. You know, you see all these new YouTubers coming out there, and then they become quickly disappointed and disenchanted with what they're seeing. And you know, when they see these articles, I had big discussions with them. And you know, as you spoke about the federation, you know, this is just another snippet from the article. When Dwight Yorke addressed Dwight Yorke about that, he said when they were talking about the president, he said he wasn't being transparent. The biggest issue was the financials. They were just constant salary issues, and that started to cause a bit of unrest, which we've heard before. Again, I keep warning him about sorting it out, so we were not having that conversation around us when the team was together. And you know, he mentioned, you know, this is just a small part. Like I said, it's very comprehensive. You all could check it out. I can't do the entire thing, but once again, you know, he is speaking directly about the president and transparency and finances and so on. Further on in the article, he mentioned as well that he would even try to, when they were renegotiating the contract, he would try to reach out to him. They would set up meetings. He was not taking his calls. He found out his staff was dismissed. You know, beforehand, before any discussion took place with him. And, you know, these are just one of several things he highlighted about how things were handled. You spoke about change and how things need to drastically change. This is a quote-unquote new regime. You know, we had the normalization committee. We had that before. We knew what took place before with when the normalization came in and, you know, got rid of the last regime, brought in the normalization committee, and here we are now. And this is supposed to be the first new regime. And, you know, hearing these things from Dwight Yorke, it feels like it's more of the same, don't you think?
Yeah, of course, it's more of the same. You know, it's chaos, absolute chaos. And, you know, I did read that part of the article as well, where, you know, Dwight, you know, he heard the rest of his staff were dismissed. And if that didn't in fact happen, that is so unprofessional. It is so unprofessional. It's scary. It is scary. If he really did that, I can't get my head around it. Seriously, with no discussion with the manager, no discussion with the coach. I can't get my head around that. But you know, that is par for the course for Trinidad and Tobago football. And Andrea, I always used to wonder if, you know, after obviously we qualified for the World Cup in 2006, you know, things looked as though it's going to be going forward. We would progress and what have you. I was not expecting us to qualify for every World Cup, but what I was really expecting was a change in our infrastructure, right? And that change never happened. And you just know, that we're going into our qualifying campaign. Of course, we are quite optimistic, like everyone would be optimistic. But, you know, when you really sit back and you analyze and you compare us to the other teams. I was at the Unity Cup. I was there. I looked at the games. I saw Dwight after the games and, you know, the staff and what have you. And we are so far behind. So far behind. It is scary. Ghana was in second gear. They never came out of second gear. Even Jamaica, I know Jamaica just beat us 3-2. And again, the score is not a fair reflection of the game when you really analyze the game. Jamaica looked as though they could go into fourth and fifth gear whenever they felt like it. Whenever they decided to up the pace, to up the tempo, it appears as though they could do that at will and they'll be able to slice through us. So, again, it's delusion that we honestly think we are as good as we are.
Mm-hmm.
We probably have maybe 4 players who, possibly 5, who are good enough to be effective at international level. Maybe 4, maybe 5, right? So I agree with him with that as well in terms of the quality, right? So I think he did as best as he could possibly do. The same with Angus, right? So where do we go from here? That's the question.
Yep.
And that's a question for Kieran to answer. Where do we go from here? I've also told the president my lines are open. My lines are open to help, right? Whether he wants to get that help and whether he's able to effect change with the advice given to him, that will come down to him. But I could say something. We need a huge amount of money into our football. A huge amount. Well, I say a huge amount. We probably need about 150 million Trinidad dollars, which is only about 50 million pounds. Premier League players earn that in a year. So I believe if we get about 150 million Trinidad dollars, we could restructure Trinidad football. We could really try to develop coaches. We could help with the setting up of academies and clubs. We could set up a good professional league with that as well, and we could start to make some type of progress. But does the football sector or the stakeholders, are they prepared to put that money in? And I don't think so. I don't think they are. We are not a footballing country. Trinidad and Tobago is not a footballing country, right? We one of those countries that, if the team is doing okay, we jump on the board and everybody is, jumping and waving and what have you. But we don't know what it means to plan. We have no plan, right? So we don't do things by design. We do things by guess. And if you're doing things by guessing is not going to give you success. You need to do things by design, and you're able to forge and to forge a path to success. It's just not going to happen. And we wouldn't learn. We wouldn't learn. Wouldn't learn at all.
Yes, and just to build on what you're saying there, even though it felt like just yesterday, I really started to get involved. It's been almost my entire life, following this game, being a part of it, starting off as a fan, then, fortunately from hard work, ended up working with the national team with Kelvin at some point in time, working with clubs, getting knowledge, speaking with people from different aspects, not just the sporting side, the media side, and all those things. And, you are right. We mistakenly or naively or even delusionally, as you said earlier, call ourselves a footballing nation, and we really are not. We have people who like to watch football. We like to watch international football. We like to watch club football. You see guys willing to fork out 1,200 TT to buy, a Premier League jersey or a team of their choice, even their national team. And, it doesn't translate, that's a whole other discussion, but, it tapped into something there. And, even with discussions, I've worked with people outside, as I worked in the CPL and so on, and just getting discussions from people who are within those, in terms of the bracket of investors. And generally, the consensus I get from all of them is that there is a lack of trust from people who may potentially consider it. They don't believe that the people, which goes back to what you're saying, whoever's involved now are capable of, trust, that's the first issue, and are capable of executing those investments to turn them into what it is they say they want. And, that is a real issue. That shows the damage that was done over the years, that the few people that are interested are highly skeptical. Hey, I don't know if my money is going to go where it's supposed to go. We're always hearing money disappearing. We're always hearing about inconsistencies with salaries and so on. And you are spot on. Football is a game that needs a lot of financial investment. There is no two ways about it. Other countries have shown us you could do a lot with a little. We've seen the playing field level in the Caribbean. And, as you rightfully said, look at the last game. Even though we weren't qualified for the World Cup, the last game against, what was it? Was it Grenada? I don't know, Bermuda. I can't remember right now. We drew 2-2, Bermuda. We saw, even though they were quote-unquote supposedly the weakest in the group, they were getting decent results. They were scoring goals. They didn't win. On paper, they were supposed to finish at the bottom. But if you look at that last performance and some of their games against other teams, you're seeing it even at club level. There was a brief period we had a little bit of hope. I use the Stephen Hart era as a reference. That's when he was around. Central FC was doing pretty well. And in the CFU region, we were dominant in that region. And then we would get to the CONCACAF wider region and the MLS clubs that show us the gap. Central FC around 2014 to 2016 was at the time, and along with W Connection, the two best teams we had with that Tulaguera and those guys. And then they would dominate the CFU. And then they would go to when they get to the CONCACAF Champions League, get smashed 5-0 by LA Galaxy and things like that. And now that's not even the case. We can't even defeat teams in our region. If we do, it's by narrow margins. And that's kudos to those teams. They are learning. While they're not perfect, and I'm sure they have their problems as well. I spoke to Lance Whitaker, formerly of Sportsmax, and he would tell me as we look at Jamaica, and they are further along, and even they have problems as well. But, back to Trinidad, we need financial investments, and that's, to me, the scary part. And when Dwight Yorke says things like this, if you're an investor and you're looking in and be like, wow, if they treat Dwight Yorke like this, what hope does the normal coaches and the quote-unquote lower-level coaches have when they get in? And, a lot of the fans, this is to address the fans, Kelvin. A lot of the fans, they love to call the names. Hey, we would love to get this coach and we'd love to get that coach. We need to get, the usual narrative is we should get a foreign coach. And I understand the argument why they say that. But everything you highlighted here in this video, and Dwight Yorke as well, these are the little obstacles that fans, and we try to educate here, folks. We're not one of those tabloid channels. It's healthy football discussions where finances, just the mishandling of things by the federations, the lack of, the standards required by our players is just not there. We can't get that overnight change. And as you said, what now? What do we do now? To me, it is daunting because in addition to the money, there seems to be a lot of people. I'm not going to go and attack people now, but there's a lot of people that probably in any other organization, if you work for any company, they evaluate you on performance, just like what Dwight Yorke was evaluated. And there are some people who I think, have served their time. They're too comfortable in certain positions. And, unfortunately, and this is not just at the TTFA, all the way down to grassroots levels and so on, that they're not willing to improve themselves. There's a phrase I heard somebody say today where there's some people that love football and there's people that need football because, they enjoy the little free plane ride to go somewhere for a conference, sit in the VIP box on a trip. And, all these things trickle down to the players and development and so on. And so much. We can have a whole other episode about that. I know we're talking about Dwight Yorke, but he has reopened that kind of worms that people seem to forget, that we are very much in a bad place. And it's very scary. I don't like to say this, but, seeing us improving for the next campaign, barring some drastic constructive changes, things look very bleak. I mean, what do you think?
Well, yeah, of course things are bleak because who are the real talents back home right now. Listen, I'm sure they have some talented boys, some talented 14, 15, 16-year-olds right now who could probably feature in the next few years in the next qualifying campaign. You'll always find one or two, but one or two is not enough. The only chance we have is if we're able to identify talent abroad. So we are able to identify players with Trinidad and Tobago heritage that we're able to convince to step into this chaos that we have here, right? I think that's the only chance we have to be able to have a core of a team that's playing at a good level out in Europe. It's the only chance we have. So in terms of the boys in Trinidad, I feel sorry for them as well because the structure back home is a joke. It's an absolute joke, and Andrew, listen, you could go on and you could go on. You could just go on. There's so many things wrong with football in Trinidad. I honestly believe I could become Trinidad and Tobago president because I'll sort it out. I'll sort it out. Right? But
Why not?
well, I have my responsibilities over here,
Right.
obviously my kids and their footballing career, and I need to guide them with that. And listen, I wouldn't rule it out somehow, but the way things are structured is structured in a way where it's difficult for anyone to come in who is honest and who who's professional and who just wants to clean things up. It's very difficult for them to come in. Right? It's very difficult to get in. The way how the elections are held and what have you. So we are a laughing stock, and we'll continue to be a laughing stock as long as we have this amateur way in which we organize things.
And Stephen Hart said that.
We are serious.
Yeah, correct. And just to build on that, as well, Stephen had said the same thing when he was on his way out. He exited in a very classy way. The one thing he did say is like, Trinidad Tobago needs to do things more professionally. And a lot of people thought it was a throwaway comment at the time. But, he knew what he was saying, and, you're right. And, just to highlight, before we start to wrap things up, I got SofaScore provided us this data where in terms of Angus Eve and Dwight Yorke, because they were both half and half involved in the campaign. Angus at the beginning, Yorke at the end. And, 41 matches for Angus, 17 for Yorke, 18 wins for Angus, 4 for Dwight Yorke, 11 draws, 7, 12 losses, win efficiency for Angus, 53. Obviously, he played more. I don't want to just read out the numbers for the sake of reading out numbers because it shows you, even though Yorke was there for a shorter period of time, this is not me dismissing Angus. Angus got some really good results. I think, like you said, he did the best with what he could. In a lot of ways, he punched above his weight, I think. Dwight Yorke as well. And the reason why I brought up these stats from SofaScore, thanks to them, it shows you how it's not just numbers. There's so many things you need to look at, as he mentioned in that article. And it is interesting to see where they go next. I also I want to hear your thoughts on this as well, because, Wide 868 is not, they are their own independent organization. And sometimes, the TTFA, which I think is their job, I'll defend them in some extent. If you're a company man, you have to portray your company the best way possible. But sometimes I think these articles are very important when you have people outside that TTFA umbrella giving their opinions. So that way they could speak freely and say their thoughts in a constructive manner. Because one problem I have, before we go, Kelvin, is that like how we're having this discussion here, it seems to be there's a lot of people that don't know how to disagree agreeably. If you have a differing opinion, usually it's very black and white. If you disagree with this particular person, you usually put in a corner, block that person out. And that's just one of the many things that are symptoms of the problems of Trinidad and Tobago football. But just to wrap things up, is there anything, out from that article, which is very long, and folks, you could check it out at Wired 868. Maybe we'll try to get on to Dwight Yorke as well and maybe have a conversation with him from the source himself. But, what particularly stood out outside what we already discussed, if you didn't already?
As I said before, Dwight was, he's more or less been hung out to dry, for me, right? What were they really expecting? It's something interesting. When I was up, I watch all the games. I stay up late, and I'm trying to catch the games here in the UK. I'll be messaging Marvin and Andrews, and we'll be messaging each other, and some of the other boys, and we really rooting for the team because I want to see us qualified. I really want to see us qualified. But obviously we look at it, we analyze it. We were in the games at the Unity Cup. You're a magician because you just don't have the quality. You just don't have the quality of player required to be able to qualify. Of course, they have, Kevin Molino, or, I hold him in really high esteem. I think he is top. He's a top player, right? There are not many others I could call. Right? So, and the thing is, the boys did the best they could, let's not forget that they did the best that they could. That's their maximum. That's their maximum. And Dwight said something that I totally agree with, right? Success in this case is seeing how much they improved, That's success in this case. A lot of people would think, well, success is meant to be World Cup qualification. But if you are realistic and you really analyze the talent at his disposal and where they actually came from, with the time constraints in terms of working with the players and being able to put forward your philosophy for the players to be effective in a match, I think they did well. I actually think they did well, right? So maybe we didn't qualify, but they did their absolute best, and that's their ceiling, right? Now, the question is, how can we build from that? So we can't go back and do the same thing we were doing before, as Dwight highlighted. So if we need to build from where Dwight has the team now, what is the plan to be able to build from that? And we don't have one. We don't have one, right? What is the president and those involved doing to ensure that the structure changes, that we do things differently? We went on a trip to Uzbekistan, and I'm not sure who paid for that, but I'm just wondering if it would have been, if what kind of money was spent to do it, or whether the cost was with from the Uzbek Federation, or whoever it was. But I'm just wondering if that money would have been better spent to invest in our football back home, to try to put a structure in place to help develop young players, the young talents back home. It's listen, Andre, I'm telling you, we are so far behind. We are so far behind, and I cannot see where we actually go from here. Seriously. Honestly, hand on heart, wish I could come in and sort them out.
Yeah.
Just come in, have a few people who I would hand pick to come and be able to and us sort it out, right? And we may have a chance. We may have a chance. But as it is right now, I cannot see how we're going to even contend for the next World Cup. The president could put it right. The president could get Dwight to come back,
Mhm.
But does he have that humility? Is he humble enough to do that? You check what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
He's not going to be humble enough to do that, because he's going to stick to his guns, right? And with all due respect to him and all the others in the footballing fraternity, I'm being honest, they don't know more football than Dwight.
Mhm.
They don't know more football than Dwight. So I would love to be in that technical meeting where they are criticizing what the manager did, what Dwight did, and his staff. Right? I would really like to hear how they're criticizing, but they're not looking at themselves. They're not looking at their deficiencies. They're not doing that. They're trying to pick holes with a guy who has a limited amount of time with the team, with a guy who doesn't have a very talented team, but they're picking holes, those technical experts. It just makes me laugh. Honestly, you could only laugh at it, because it's absolutely hilarious. Who are those guys being able to analyze what he's doing, what he's achieved in the game? And someone would be listening to this, and they would probably say, well, if you are a top player, doesn't mean you're going to be a top coach. Well, we've only qualified for one World Cup. We've gone to one World Cup, right? So it's not like we have a history of qualifying for World Cups. We don't have that history. So, all of those who talking, right? With all due respect, they don't know more than them. They don't. And they could say, well, Kelvin Jack, he talking nonsense. That's his friend or whatever, and what have you. Listen, I don't kiss anyone behind. And people who know me know that I don't kiss anyone behind. I'm saying it as it is. I am talking the truth. The truth. And if they want to listen, and they want to try and get some help, and they want to try to be successful, my phone lines are open, because they're failing miserably, and they have the country's most celebrated player. Let's not forget Russell there as well,
Yep.
Let's not forget Russell Latipi, right? Brilliant footballer, been coaching for a long time, played at the top level. So let's not forget his experience in this as well, right? And the disrespect that those boys are receiving from non-footballing people, with a far inferior football IQ, I find staggering.
Yes.
Staggering. Woo. How are they even qualified to criticize? How? I can't even get my head around it.
Mhm.
I am 10 times more qualified to criticize than them. And I'm not.
Mhm.
I'm not. So, listen, Andre, it seriously frustrates me, it frustrates me. Sometimes I'm here, and, my boys would be, oh, Kelvin, Daddy, what happened to the game with Trinidad last night? Oh, we lost. It seriously affects me, Seriously affects me, right? So I don't even know where we go from here. Don't know where we go. Really don't know where we go. I just hope that there is, um, I don't know, some wealthy person in Trinidad who would decide, listen, Kelvin, come back and sort Trinidad and Tobago football out. Come and show us what to do. That's the easy part. I could show them what to do, what they need to do. That's easy. But you need money to do it.
Yes.
You need money to do it. 150 million minimum.
Yep.
Minimum.
And I totally agree with what you were saying there about in terms of it. It is a cultural problem. It's not unique to Trinidad and Tobago, but definitely in the context of what we're talking about. I have seen, not just in football, but generally, there is and this is more a philosophical thing about Trinidad and Tobago. Leo Ben Hacker kind of touched on it in an article, and I wish I could have found it. And this is when you guys were still playing. I was still a fanboy and watching you guys on TV, but I was still digging up in things that people never used to back then. The internet was still early stage back then. And he mentioned something like that. I'm not going to paraphrase because I can't remember exactly what he said, but everything you said there, he highlighted in his way, in the Leo sort of way, in terms of the cultural approach, not just from the footballing aspect, but from the media, the fans, our general approach to the sport, the lackadaisical thing. And I think people took it in a negative way where they saw it as he was criticizing that we were too laid back, which was completely wrong. Even then, I knew that they didn't understand what he was saying. And, people they took offense to what he was saying. And anybody who is a hardworking person, or at least mature, would understand what he was saying. It's just like anything. And, I've seen people in the circles, in sports in general, where Dwight Yorke is the best example. This guy has accomplished everything. I don't want to repeat everything he's saying. At the highest level, at club level. I mean, he won a Champions League. The original R9 from Brazil never won that. But Dwight Yorke has a treble, which is crazy to think about. What he has achieved as a player. It's not easy. To this day, we've had nobody that has come really close to replicate what he's doing, not just in Trinidad and Tobago. He's respected worldwide, just like Brian Lara and other players, Russell as well, yourself included. People take it for granted now to play at that level, what is required to do that. And then you have not just people criticizing the coaches, but, the people in the technical committees. I was always curious how those discussions would go. What do you tell somebody like Dwight Yorke, in a meeting when you're evaluating, which is what you said just now. And that combined with the money, combined with, the where we are in football and all the things that we mentioned before are things that, hopefully having these discussions because of the internet now. I do have a lot of, pros and cons about social media, but the one good thing is now the information, for better or worse, is unfiltered. And, hopefully the discussions open the minds of the younger viewers who start seeing things from a wider frame of reference rather than, I call it the FIFA mentality, which is the video game mentality, where you pick a squad, that squad should win. Why doesn't it win? Fire the coach, bring somebody else in. And these little aspects, from yourself, even Dwight Yorke in his press conferences used to say it, can win as well. It's very important as a nation, that we educate ourselves and people with integrity. Like, for example, you spoke about, investments. We have to, make sure that if we get somebody that comes in, they have people like yourself and people that understand. Because I can tell you this, I've worked in sports at even the lower levels as well. And when you get sponsors, sometimes they don't understand, Kelvin. They don't understand in their mind, well, I gave you X, Y, Z, why aren't you winning? And, that's where the experienced people would come in and say, listen, we need X, Y, Z. I remember I had discussions with Anthony Roger when he was coaching in the SSFL. And he would tell me about discussions where they have no clue. They know what they want. They know what they want visually. They want a team that dress nice. They have the uniforms. They look good. They need to win. But they don't understand the training required, the diets required, the mental aspect, the post-match, the pre-match preparations, transportation, the education of parents involved, which is a whole other discussion. And that, is the same thing at national level. I think sometimes a lot of the sponsors, that's where you need to have people like yourself. Like you said, if somebody comes, at least you could explain those things to them beforehand. And it's a whole thing. But Kelvin, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. This is a very layered discussion. That's why I didn't want to do a short discussion, because people like to do these little 15-minute discussions, and you can't possibly have a really comprehensive discussion in 15 minutes. I know the algorithm says otherwise. So it's a pleasure to have you. And just a positive note, because Kelvin Jack has been one of our biggest supporters from the very beginning. In the last couple of months, we went up by over 1,500 subscribers. So we crossed the 3,000 subscriber mark. The viewership in the last 3 months was 27,000. The live streams have been very, very high. We even rival some of the local stations. I won't say their names. And it's very good to see that we're building a community, not just with football talk and supporting, but healthy discussion. And, Kelvin has been a major part of that. So I want to, before you go, say a special thank you for that, for continuing to give us your insight. Yes.
Absolutely my pleasure, Andre. Absolutely my pleasure. Listen, let's I don't even hold much hope, hold on, state. But I would say it anyway. Let's hope that if people of influence listen to this interview, that that they're willing to make some type of move, but probably not a bunch of jokers, honestly. All jokers.
Yes.
Seriously, bunch of jokers.
Yes, it's a whole cultural discussion that we could definitely tap into on another episode. So, with that being said, folks, don't forget to like, subscribe. Let us know what you think in the comment section and in the live chat as well. Be sure to head over to extvmedia.com. Follow all the socials I'll be putting on the screen, because when you do that, you automatically qualify for giveaways. Last time we had a giveaway. Mark Molino, who it turns out to be a relative of Kevin Molino, won one of the prizes with signatures from the national team. With Kylie Overy and those guys, will be giving away maybe a copy of EAFC. So when you do that, you automatically qualify to get a chance to win one of those things. And, maybe you could even join in one of the discussions one of these days as well. We do have live watch-alongs. We had Kelvin in studio a couple months ago, where he sat down in his chair right here, and, we had fully interactive stuff, which nobody does that. Usually it's, preset on a television, which is fine, but now you could actually engage one-on-one with these guys and continue to support. We have merch as well that's delivered globally as well. All those things. So, Kelvin, it's been a pleasure, and folks, we'll see you soon.
See you later.
Hi, I'm Shaka Hislop, and you're here at Extra Time TV.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching Extra Time TV. Don't forget to like and subscribe.